Okay, members of the public, members of the committee. Councilor Carichanis,
Okay, we want to start.
calling this meeting to order. Thank you, members. Thank you, members of the public. Now we are going to be dealing with the second item on the agenda, and that's LS 22.2, that's dogs in schoolyards. Do we have, we don't have any deputants, members of council? We don't have any deputants on this item. Any questions to staff?
Yeah, I have questions.
Questions to staff. Councilor Nunciara, please go ahead.
So, to staff, with the bylaw and enforcing the bylaw on city property, is there any dialogue with the school boards at all on this issue? Like, do we have enough enforcement to go enforce bylaws in school property?
That's an amendment.
Through the chair to the councillor, just so be clear, I understand the question. You're asking if we have enough enforcement resources to enforce our bylaws on the school property?
Yeah, and should the school board be enforcing those bylaws?
Through the chair to Councillor Nunziata, to take on the additional work of enforcing our bylaws on private properties such as the school boards, and again, trying to understand which school boards you're referring to, because there's also private schools, but just on the public school board and Catholic school board properties alone, that would be a significant increase of work for us with our existing resource complement.
Okay, so what we have before us is a recommendation for you to report back on that. So there hasn't been any dialogue with the schools. Like, what I don't understand, why are we doing this without going through the school board and asking the school board to enforce their bylaws?
Through the chair to Councillor Nunzia, I can't speak to why we're doing this. This is not staff's recommendation.
No, I know it's not a staff recommendation, but okay, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Nunciara. And we have Councillor Davis, that's here. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So right now there is a bylaw that our bylaw officers are enforcing. There's two about dogs off leash and stoop and scoop, right?
That is correct, Councillor.
And are those bylaws in effect on school properties?
Through the chair to Councillor Davis, no, our bylaws are applicable to municipal properties, not to private properties such as school board properties.
If you...
Sorry, I think our legal counsel might want to further expand on that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note the prohibition is that the provisions that you're referencing, Councillor, are specific to a person, so they would create offenses for the person to take dogs off leash outside of their property.
So they would apply on school grounds?
Provided that they're off leash, off of their property, then it would be an offense.
And if they didn't pick up after their dog in the school playground, that also is an offense?
I don't have the provision right before me, but I believe that's correct.
So in fact, who can enforce those two bylaws that apply on school properties?
So the enforcement of our municipal bylaws are city staff.
So I understand that there is some concern about it being a resource issue, but we have never been able to resolve this because of perceived jurisdictional problems. So if the school board were to agree to allow bylaw officers on their properties, in fact, they're dying to have them come on their properties, would they be able to enforce the dog off leash and stoop and scoop bylaw on school properties?
So the city could enforce anyone who's contravening any municipal bylaw.
Okay. I just have another question. There was a report request, I think, in 2012, and even prior, requesting further information and to undertake dialogue with the school board about this matter. Has there been any discussion with the school board about this matter?
Not to my knowledge, and it is not on our current work plan.
Pardon me?
It is not on our current work plan.
It is not on your, sorry?
Current work plan.
Current work
Plan.
plan, okay. So if the school board had security officers or school principals even willing to do this, could they enforce the bylaw stoop and scoop and dogs off leash bylaw on their own school properties?
So I want to be clear here that the school board has jurisdiction over their properties. They could certainly create their own rules and enforce them. If your question is, could the school board enforce city bylaws?
Right.
Then I think that's a question that would require further review and consideration, in particular, some of the labor relations issues that would be impacted by that.
Do we not have to have provincial offenses officers who are enforcing our bylaw?
So the bylaws are enforced by provincial offenses officers.
Okay, so there are no school board personnel who currently are provincial offenses officers, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, who could enforce the bylaw on school properties, whether during school hours or after school hours, when there's no one there. So I don't see that there's anyone but our officers who could enforce this bylaw. So if I might, the head of MLS, Tracy's not here, I guess it's Mark, would you be able to report to us and then have the discussion at the school board city committee, which is a committee intended to discuss school board issues, and then bring back here this report with comments from the school board? Could you report on that to us?
We could meet with the school board. I cannot commit to reporting back to committee at this time.
You could not do a report?
That was your last question. Okay.
That's unbelievable.
Is
Not commit to it.
Deputy Mayor Gramaker, you're next?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I think this question may be to our legal staff, because I'm not quite sure if I understood your answer to Councillor Davis at the beginning. Our city bylaws, do they apply to, I mean, we have many bylaws that apply to private property. So our, for example, dogs off leash bylaw, does that or does it not apply to a schoolyard that's owned by the school board?
So again, the provision is a general offense provision that makes it an offense for a person to have their dog off leash, off of their property. If a dog is off leash, off of property on a school property, the person has committed an offense for the municipal bylaw.
Okay, so if I take my dog onto the school down the street and I let him off leash and he's running around the schoolyard, that's an offense because my dog is off leash, correct?
That's correct.
And you're saying, though, our animal control officers or MLS officers wouldn't enforce that on private property?
So I think that's more of a question for staff as to how they operationalize enforcement.
So if I let my dog off leash in a schoolyard and it's running around all the children, and we've heard from our legal staff that's a violation of our dogs off leash bylaw, do our staff enforce that on school property, yes or no?
We do have the authority, based on legal's advice, to enforce the bylaw in that situation. If you're asking me if we've done so, I can't speak to that without having reviewed our records. I'm not aware of us having gone or attended school board properties to enforce dogs off leash.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Chair, maybe a similar scenario. If I let my dog off leash on a church property, at my local church down the street, and the dog's running around the church outside, off-leash, would our officers usually go onto the church properties to enforce the bylaw?
Again, through the chair to Councillor DeBaremaker, if we received a complaint about a dog at large, we would respond to that. A dog off leash, there's a subtle nuance there because a dog off leash would, to me, would indicate that the owner is present, but they have their dog off the leash, whereas a dog at large is a dog roaming free where there's no obvious signs of a dog's owner being present.
So I'm going to restrict it to dogs off leash. So if dog's off leash, if I'm walking my dog past the church and I let him run around the church's backyard, would we normally enforce that dogs off leash bylaw on a, say, a church property?
If we'd received a complaint about it, we would dispatch an officer in accordance with our service levels to investigate that. But would we normally, we don't proactively patrol
Right.
private properties such as we do in our parks for those issues.
So if I can clarify, so are you saying that if you receive a complaint about me walking my dog off leash at a churchyard, you would, our officers would go and inspect it, but would they do the same thing at a school? If I'm walking my dog off leash at a school, somebody calls 311 and says there's a guy with his dog off leash, would our inspectors go and enforce the bylaw on A, the church property, and B, the school property?
Through the chair to Councillor DeBaremaker, if we receive complaints to that effect, we would go and send an officer to investigate in accordance with our service standards.
And could you lay a charge against me if I'm letting my dog off leash, say at a church or at a public school?
Yes, we could.
You could. Now you said earlier that we, to your knowledge, we would seldom do that, correct? Not proactively, certainly.
Through the chair to the Councillor DeBaremaker, I'm not aware of our records in terms of have we done that in the past. So theoretically, does the law permit us to do that? Yes. Have we, as a practice, operationally done that or had calls for that type of service response? That I do not have that information in front of me.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Chair, is my understanding correct that we would view a school as, I'll call it a private property, and that it's really up to school to police their own property? So if I'm on their property without permission, I'm actually trespassing. Because my local school, which is literally in the back of my house, the school board kicks kids out of there all the time. All those nice young boys drinking beer on a Saturday night, they get scooted off the property.
So I'll answer that, Councillor. I think that's correct. Any property owner has the right to control who is permitted to attend on their property and what conduct those individuals can do.
So if the school board doesn't like me walking my dog through their schoolyard or through their field, off or on leash, they can politely ask me to leave.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is Councillor Doucette, you have some questions there.
Thank you very much. I apologise, I was running late. Are you aware of my motion which went to the City School Board Advisory Committee in 2015, where we asked that Municipal Licensing and Standard work with the school boards on a joint effort for the off-leash dogs on school property adjacent to city properties? Are you aware of this motion?
I don't recall that motion.
So therefore, you are not aware that the staff did meet with, at that point, I think it was just TDSB staff, because the idea was that on adjoined properties, if our staff are there anyway enforcing city side and a dog and an owner was to step onto TDSB property, I'm just using TDSB as an example, would it not make more sense for the officer then to be able to give a warning or give a fine? At that point in time, are you aware that TDSB did not see it as a priority and therefore were not interested, because we'd have to draw up a trespassing act so that city staff could enforce on TDSB property? Is that aware? Are you aware of that?
No.
So I guess what we've got before us is a letter asking us to revisit this. I understand earlier on you've said you won't be able to do reports and things, and it's not on your agenda at this point in time. Would you be prepared to revisit what was looked at in 2015, because this is still an outstanding issue, and we do have children going into their schools covered in whatever dogs leave on fields when the owner don't always see and don't pick up? And I'm not being graphic here.
Yeah, so I believe with our operational staff, we are aware, I'm not aware of the particular motion, but I am aware of the issue and of issues associated with TTC lands, hydro lands, a number of other lands. So I do know it's an issue. What I'm not committing to is reporting back on it, but I believe we can revisit the issue and have operational staff meet with the school board, yes.
So we could meet with all 4 of the school boards who have adjoining property to city properties.
Yes, we could work towards that.
Because are you aware, I'm not trying to give you a whole bunch of more work. I'm not asking that you enforce school board properties unless there is city property, basically usually with no fence on it. Okay, thank you.
I understand.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, just a point of order. I just want to say,
Yes,
yeah, I apologize, but I have to leave at 3 o'clock, so we have 2 items. So I'm just asking members, otherwise, the quorum would be, I'll have to break quorum. So if we can try to expedite in the next 20
otherwise we lose
minutes.
quorum.
Okay?
Okay, let's be mindful about that, and then we don't want to lose quorum, and we want to. And no, okay. Any other questions? I just have, I'm going to be very brief on these questions. How many bylaw officers do we have citywide?
Through the chair of the council, there's approximately 200 bylaw officers that comprise the officers in the investigation services unit, as well as the bylaw enforcement unit, which do the enforcement of.
How many city parks do we have?
We have approximately 1,500 parks.
What's the current operating budget for enforcement officers who oversee dog off-leash?
We don't break our budget down into terms of how much we budget for different types of enforcement activity. So for instance, currently my understanding is we have 15 dedicated municipal standards officers for doing enforcement in the city parks. So we don't break that down though to the specific type of activity they would do in that enforcement.
Allow me to understand that. So we have 1,500 parks, city parks. We have 15 bylaw officers that they do the enforcement within parks, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know how many schoolyards do we have within the Catholic and public and private schools approximately? Do you know, do you have those figures?
I'm aware that of the Toronto District School Board, there's over 584. So if you went with the Catholic School Board and other properties, it would, an estimate from my colleague, closer to 2,000.
Close to 2,000.
No, if you included Hydrolands, other properties, but the one number I'm keenly aware of is the 584 on Toronto public school boards, Toronto District School Boards.
So that's without including, you just mentioned hydrolands or TTC lands and whatever else. So do you happen to have that information? If not, that's fine, I'll understand that.
It's significant, but I don't have the exact number.
So in essence, do we have the manpower for enforcement purpose at the moment to add to the schools?
It would be difficult to give a definitive answer that we do or don't. It would be also needing to understand the quantum of the problem. How many issues are there with dogs off leash or dog owners not cleaning up after their dogs on school board properties? Again, because we don't have that data or that information, we don't do proactive enforcement. We only respond to complaints in those regards. So it would be difficult for us to project, do we or do we not have enough resources, or if we don't, what would be the resource demand, because we don't know the scale or the scope of the work involved. So we'd have to have a lot more analysis done to understand, to provide meaningful information to council as to what the resource demands would be and what would be the service levels to manage the expectations of people as well.
So to do that, it would be appropriate perhaps to refer back these city staff so you can just work on that kind of analysis or and come back at whatever point, right?
I would suggest, yes, we have a fair bit more work to do to be able to provide.
Thanks so much. And be mindful of time. That's in terms of questions. Any other questions, speakers on the item? Councilor Davis, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I know that we come here and talk about grand schemes for transportation and our wet weather flow program, not this particular committee, but here at City Hall, our wet weather flow program, billions of dollars and large issues that concern us. This may seem a small issue, but since being elected 14 years ago, I consistently hear in my community from schools that some adjacent to parks with no fences in between, that dogs are messing school playgrounds. Now, we can all say that's their problem. What I heard today was that there's no one who can enforce those bylaws of off-leash and poop and scoop except our MLS officers. Instead, what we get is, the answer is that all of our schools can pass trespass bylaws and they can enforce their trespass bylaws to keep dogs out of parks. That is not a solution. That is not the solution. I'm not suggesting in this motion that we agree to do it. It is a report request that asks for you to look at this issue, come back and meet come back with more information, have it go through the school board city committee, which is intended specifically to try and resolve issues between the school board and the city, and then report back here. It's not a big ask to try and resolve what may be a small problem to us, but is a big problem to children who come home or kids who are playing in the soccer fields under permits, the soccer leagues, the baseball leagues, who encounter this problem firsthand, first foot. So I hope that you can see it through to at least a report to try and resolve a long-standing jurisdictional problem in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Davis. Councilor Doucette, please go ahead.
I will be very quick, I promise. I do support this. It has been an ongoing issue for many, many, many years. I used to be on the other side of it, on parent council of various schools, and yes, my children would roll down their toboggan hill and come back in with things we didn't want them to have. We're also not saying that we want to give the city more work, but an agreement to be allowed to help a school board with this when we are there anyway would be a great idea. I think it would benefit everybody. So yes, I do support this, and I think that the School Advisory Committee is a good place for us to come to, because we do have the 4 boards there, we have trustees there, and it would sort of, help take it out of licensing and standards agenda anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And any other speakers?
Okay, just briefly, and then I'm going to leave. Just briefly, I know it's just a report request, but unfortunately, our staff, if you look at their the work plan that was presented to us actually just a few months ago, we're waiting for reports that were asked 4 or 5 years ago that they haven't had a chance to report back to this committee. The payday loans, the clothing boxes, all these reports that are priority reports, they have been extremely busy and they haven't been able to report back to committee. And for us to ask for an additional report, I just think it's impossible to do. And so I'm sorry, I can't support it.
Deputy Mayor Liberamaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I certainly understand the concerns. You know, my house happens to back on a park in a schoolyard, so I see the dogs as they are dropping. Sometimes on our side of the line, sometimes on the school's property side of the line. So as great sympathy I have for the intent, I'm very reluctant to support this, and I don't think I will support it, because the school board has to be in charge of its own property. Certainly in again, literally in the park behind my house, when we ask the school board to help us clean up our park, they refuse. Even on Environment Day, they at one point wouldn't come onto our property to clean up the city park. They only went up to the school invisible boundary where there was no fence. When our Parks Department asked the school board to pitch in some money towards improving the soccer field, which nobody used except the kids at the school during the day. There was no permitting at the soccer pitch. The school board refused and said, it's your property, you're in charge of it, you've got to maintain it, you've got to do all those things. So when I see kids from the school throwing garbage in our park, I know that if I call the school board and say, would you mind if your TDSB staff came over to the city park with a bag and some gloves and clean up all the garbage that your kids are throwing in our city park, the answer is going to be no, it's your property. So although I'm sure the school would love it if we sent our inspectors to start enforcing people walking dogs off leash or not picking up after the dogs in the schoolyards, we don't even pick up and enforce our own bylaws in our own park. On our side of the line, it's the same thing as the school board side of the line. Kids can't walk through that park. They certainly can't roll down the hill, because if they do, they're going to be messy when they get down to the bottom of the park. So I'd rather focus on our properties first before I start subsidizing the school board yet again on another issue. So unfortunately, I won't be supporting this.
Thank you. I'm just going to be very brief. I'm going to move the following motion, that the item be referred to the Executive Director of Municipal Licensing Standards for consideration. On this, I just wanted to share with you, and I'm going to be extremely brief, is I do share the concerns by our esteemed colleagues and Councillor Doucette and Davis with regards to that. But at the same time, I want to share with you one thing with the school board. We had this joint venture, and that where we spent over $500,000 at St. Clair Northcliffe. And once the work was done by the city and beautified as a key location, they just walk away. And now they're coming back to us and they say, well, we want enforcement on the dog off leash. And once we had that kind of enforcement with Toronto Parks and Recreation, guess what? They put gates and they gated this public space. So in terms of good faith, I have serious consideration, and that's in my ward, and I'll be bringing to City Council a notice of motion, because that's, you know what, that's highway is, let me just rephrase what I was going to say, this is wrong what they're trying to do. So I think that to be worthwhile maybe to have that conversation in terms of the recommendations of Councillor Davis and putting this recommendation forward. So it's not the intention of kill it, or just to defer indefinitely, but to bring it back. So that's before you. Councilor Nunciara, we need you for quorum, otherwise we're going to lose quorum. So we have, Councilor Nunciara, we have a recommendation before you. All those in favor? That's the one that I'm putting forward. All those in favor? Against? Carries. Lose. Is on the item.
Someone has to move the item. So someone has to move adoption of the report.
Okay,
There is no report.
Someone has to move the item in order for it to be voted on. Move adoption of the recommendation contained in the communication. This motion has now failed. As a result, this item will go to council for consideration.
no, we have, that was the motion, but on the item, you vote on the item.
Someone has to move the item.
Okay, I'll
before it
move
can
the
be
item,
voted on.
I'll move the item. Okay,
Okay.
let's have-
Mr. Chair, just clarification, we're moving an item. Is the item the recommendations in Councillor Davis's letter?
Yes.
Okay, it's not a report, but a letter. Okay, so we vote against this and then
It
it's,
goes to, if it's voted against, it goes to council without recommendation. It contains a
So
recommendation.
members, so we are very clear, we are voting on LS 22.2.
But if we move
That's the
receipt-
document that's before us.
You cannot remove receipt because the item contains a recommendation, and a communication or a report with a recommendation cannot be received at committee. It's only council's jurisdiction to receive it.
I don't think so.
Okay, so we have a motion from Councillor,
So I still want, for the clerk, if we defer indefinitely, I've heard that done at committee.
That is an order.
That's in order. Then I'll move deferral indefinitely, or maybe, yeah, okay.
Defer indefinitely.
so the motion that I put before, it failed. So now we have another motion. Who hasn't spoken yet? Councillor Janis?
Chair, I would move that we receive, I moved that, refer indefinitely.
Okay, all those in favor? Against? Carries. Okay, the next item is the number 3.
Yes, I held the item down, so I'll just move it.
You are moving, and I have a recommendation on that one. And that's from Councillor Ainsley. That's a communication that we have from Councillor Ainsley. And I have a recommendation as well.
Oh. There's issues?
So there is some questions. If, as chair, I would like to ask the opinion from the legal department on these recommendations and from city staff. And I do have a recommendation as well. I'm not sure if you had a chance to see it. Could you please comment?
Yeah, so just to be very succinct, I know we have a little bit of time. We are concerned with the release of the information just to councillors. We feel that there are privacy implications associated with what's recommended. However, I think that the draft motion that I think the chair is planning to move would address some of those matters and allow staff to approach this through an open data perspective.
So just for clarification, so the recommendations within the missive that's before us, you have concerns in terms of the freedom of information and as it relates to personal information and so on, right?
That's correct.
Did you have a chance to look at the motion that? Okay, there we have.
Yes, I have, and I believe this is a way of addressing those privacy concerns.
Okay.
Just do it, otherwise, yeah. I think that's something that it can be done. Yeah.
Okay.
Are we okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor? Against? Carried. Thank you. We have the last item to.
Chair, can I defer my until next time? And you that
No. I'd rather deal with this because we have a very.
we cannot defer it. I'm asking for a deferral until next cycle. You're moving, I move deferral until next cycle.
I'm not in support of the deferral. Let's deal with this, and I think that there is a motion to defer the communication of the item number 22.4 to the next cycle. All those in favor of the deferral? Against? So we have to deal with that. And the communication, so we have the recommendations before us. I had a discussion with Councilor Janis and with city staff, and on this, I have a friendly amendment that Councilor Janis was okay with that, and I would like to put this recommendation forward, just to have a fair understanding. There is about, we have more than 20, I believe, 22, don't quote me with the number, I think that's 22 directives from council on this part of the industry as it relates to the whole thing, the taxi industry, the Uber and everything else. And they have to report back. So during the work plan that it was approved by council, it was agreed that they will bring one single project, all these directives. So I think that instead of having this piecemeal approach, I think that's the logical thing is to allow city staff just to come back with one single report. And so the recommendation that I have before you, can we just? Yeah. Can you please? There you have. That's the second quarter 2018, and that's your recommendation. So I'll just have that friendly amendment there. Okay. All those in favor? Against? Carry. Thank you. A motion to adjourn? All those in favor? Against? Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone.